Hello, and welcome to the final composition tutorial. This will be part 2 of the orchestration series, where we will get into techniques on how to orchestrate a full piece. So, right now after that first video, you might be wondering, how do I go about orchestrating? There are certainly a lot of instruments in the orchestra, and then it can be challenging or even frightening to work with so many voices or so many timbres at once. One easy way that you can help think about this is thinking about the orchestra as separate ranges. You heard about the 4-part writing with soprano, alto, tenor, bass. That applies here too. You can separate the instruments into their each individual choir voice, if you will. Flutes and trumpets as soprano, horns and violas as alto, cellos and trombones as tenors, or even basses sometimes, and contrabasses or double basses, as well as your tuba and bassoon as real basses. Of course, it's much more nuanced than this, but this is an easy way you can help think about this, as it is very challenging to be able to write for certain instruments out of their comfortable range. In fact, if an instrument steps out of its comfortable range, like let's say a trumpet goes too low, it might not sound as good in a certain context as it would in its normal range. Another way you can help your orchestration sound better is thinking of the orchestra as layers. One instrument or one or two melodic lines or bass support lines aren't enough to make the orchestra sound complete, if you will. It will sound empty. To help with this, you can think of layers as individual voices almost. Just like in counterpoint, you write different melodic lines. However, it is important to differentiate between different styles of music. When you first start with orchestration, you do not want each voice to have equal priority. Instead, you want to think of it as still a harmony and a melody, except your layers can be moving. Later on in the video, we can go over a process that you can help write different orchestral pieces. A common mistake that beginners make when first starting out orchestrating is to create something known as muddiness. This means that their piece is not clear or coherent, or that the individual layers or voices are not clear at all, or they cannot hear them or differentiate them over one another. This occurs because of the aforementioned overtone series, or even the way that pitch and frequency works. At lower pitches, the frequency difference becomes lower, which means that in orchestration generally, we want to keep the lower ranges or the lower range instruments farther apart from each other, in that we want the voices to be farther apart, while the upper ranges, we want them to be close together because these are the same exact frequency gap. Failing to do this may result in muddiness, where your lower ranges are too close together and therefore they muddle up the entire piece and make it incoherent. Now, this is not always the case, as sometimes, if used right, close together lower ranges can sound ominous or even dark. But this must be used right, and if you are composing in, let's say, another style, such as a sad piece of music or even epic, you might not want these lower ranges to be close together because they might muddle up your upper range decorations or so. Another mistake that beginners make that creates muddiness is having voices cross over. This is not always a bad thing, I must elaborate, but starting out, you generally do not want to have too many voices crossing over each other. In this case, the individual voices start to sound like one distinct voice, except that voice alone is not clear because there's several different lines going on at once. Oftentimes, when they do this, they might also end up with major or minor seconds, which will confuse the listener's ear. With the important muddiness section out of the way, let's get into orchestration and how you go about doing it. There are different techniques, but one of them involves timbre. Now, individual instruments have different timbres, but what if I told you that you do not have to stick to these working timbres? You can combine them in something known as doubling. Doubling is when you combine two instrument voices into the same line or the same melody. These doublings can sound distinct, meaning that the instruments can still be distinguishable. However, together, these instruments may cause the sound to appear like something different or entirely new instrument. A really famous example of a common instrument doubling is a flute and violin. The flute and violin combine together to create almost a flowy yet woody timbre. Doubling instruments can be done effectively and can sound really, really good when used properly. However, you must have a reason for doubling. If you are experimenting, experiment with different timbres and different instruments and double them together to see what you create. There's no strict guidance on what timbres sound good together. You must decide what sounds good in your piece by yourself. Another important aspect of orchestration is the dynamic aspect. Now, dynamics, as you might recall, refer to the volume of the piece. A lot of mistakes the beginners make revolve around having all instruments play and then simply adjusting the dynamic markings at which they read. This is a mistake, as you can use the instrumentation or the amount of instruments playing at one particular time in order to make the piece sound different or sound louder than it actually is. For example, during crescendo, you can have more instruments add in as the crescendo goes on, or maybe lose out more instruments as the decrescendo happens. This helps accentuate the crescendo or decrescendo, which makes sound more impactful. Now let's get into the process. First, starting out, when you're writing an orchestral piece, you will want to not write for orchestra. This may sound counterintuitive, but you want to pull out a piano and write a 4-part harmony or a 4-part piece for it first. This is because writing for orchestra straight out of the gate is almost like looking down at a tree from the top view. You can see all the branches, you can see the leaves, but you will not be able to see the trunk. In music terms, this means that you will not be able to see the harmonies or the basics that you want to compose for first. Once you have your SATB down or your 4-part harmony down, then you start porting it over. Now, this is very important. Do not copy and paste. Copy and pasting different lines or different voices from a 4-part harmony may result in your piece sounding one-dimensional. Instead, what you want to do is assign certain lines to certain instruments. Do not double these, as it might end up sounding empty. After you've assigned all these lines, think of any doublings you want. If you have a doubling you want, then just double the melody. After this, then maybe add some chordal support, such as whole notes, half notes, or anything that you think might help. The next step is really important, adding resonance. Resonance, as I discussed last video, will help your piece sound lush, or more full than it actually is. Finally, this is the last step, and this is what makes most pieces have their distinct sound or their memorable sound. This is adding decoration, whether it be trumpet fanfare, flute runs, harp glissandos, anything that you can think of, anything that fits the vibe. This is the step that you will have the most fun on, because this is the step that gives your piece that life it deserves. I want to end off this series by saying one final thing. If composition seems daunting, don't worry. It seemed that way to me too. When I first started out, I started out an online sequencer composing for random piano pieces, and they weren't even playable. But trust me, with enough practice or time, you will be able to make a piece that will shock the world. Thank you for joining me for the final composition tutorial, and have a great journey composing.